Russia has targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure in a wave of missile strikes across the country, leaving large numbers of civilians without power and water. Kyiv's mayor said 80% of the capital had no running water, although engineers were working to repair the damage. The world's largest iPhone factory in central China is introducing new incentives to maintain its workforce. These include quadruple bonuses. The factory has been in lockdown since last month and has been beset by allegations of poor working conditions, and thousands of employees have escaped.
The South Korean military says North Korea has fired at least 10 missiles, with one ballistic weapon flying across their maritime demarcation line for the first time before landing in international waters. Seoul said it had launched 3 air-to-ground missiles in response. A UN report says a third of the glaciers located in World Heritage Sites will vanish by 2050 because of climate change. Researchers concluded that even if global temperature increases were kept below 1.5 degrees, glaciers at sites like Kilimanjaro in Tanzania and Yosemite in the United States would disappear in 3 decades.
The United Nations human rights chief has written an open letter to Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, saying that human rights should be central to the management of the social media platform. The UN intervention is seen as very unusual.
South Korea's former president Moon Jae-in says he plans to give up a pair of dogs given to him as a gift by the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, as his successor Yoon Suk-yeol was reneging on an agreed allowance of $1,800 a month to care for the pets, which are state property. Presidential officials say discussions are continuing.
200 leading classical musicians have urged Brazil to reconsider plans to ban the trade in endangered Pernambuco wood so that it can be used to make string instruments. They say no other material can match the sound produced by Pernambuco.
Republicans have made gains in the US midterm elections, but their performance appears to be falling short of expectations. The party is likely to take control of the House of Representatives with a narrow majority, but current trends suggest they could fail in their attempt to capture the Senate from the Democrats.
Facebook's parent company, Meta, is just the latest tech giant to resort to mass layoffs.
In a letter to its employees this morning, CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced that the company will let go of more than 11,000 people, roughly 13% of Meta's staff.
The Democrats have retained control of the US Senate in the midterm elections, sparking recriminations in the Republican Party. The Republican Senator, Josh Hawley, said it was time to bury the old party and build something new. The former president, Donald Trump, has continued to complain of election irregularities without providing evidence.
Talks between the leaders of the United States and China have concluded in Bali ahead of the G20 summit. Xi Jinping and Joe Biden met for more than 3 hours, during which time they had both opposed the threat of use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
Novak Djokovic will be able to play in January's Australian Open after the immigration minister overturned a ban on the tennis star's entry because of his unvaccinated status. The Serb was deported from Australia in the lead-up to this year's Grand Slam tournament and was originally barred from the country until 2025.
Donald Trump has confirmed that he will run for the White House again in 2024. The former president, who was impeached twice, still hasn't admitted he lost to Joe Biden 2 years ago. Some in the Republican Party had urged him not to run again after he did less well than they'd hoped in the midterms.
The Republican Party has won the 218th seat needed to give them control of the US House of Representatives following last week's midterm elections. The Democrats have held the Senate. The Republican majority in the lower house, although slim, will limit President Biden's ability to enact his legislative agenda.
The first game of the World Cup has just begun in Qatar between the host nation and Ecuador. Earlier, the opening ceremony at the main stadium in Doha featured a performance from Jungkook from the Korean pop band BTS and a surprise appearance by the actor Morgan Freeman.
North Korea has criticised the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres after he condemned Pyongyang's latest missile test. The foreign minister accused Mr Guterres of failing to be impartial. The UN Security Council will meet on Monday to discuss North Korea's missile launches.
Saudi Arabia is celebrating after its football team pulled off one of the greatest upsets in the history of the World Cup. The Saudis beat one of the favourites, Argentina, 2-1 in Qatar. Tunisia have drawn 0-0 with Denmark. whose team featured Christian Eriksen, only 17 months after he suffered a cardiac arrest.
The IMF has called on China to boost its COVID vaccination rates in hopes the authorities in Beijing might soon rework their zero-COVID strategy. The measures have led to public anger and a growing economic cost.
The oldest member of the South Korean boy band BTS is to begin his military training next month. Army sources say Jin will be sent to a boot camp near the border with North Korea before joining a local regiment.
Protests in China against the government's strict COVID measures there have intensified, with some people publicly venting their anger at leaders of the Communist Party. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Shanghai, calling for President Xi Jinping to step down. The BBC saw people being bundled into police cars.
Police across Europe say they've dismantled a huge drugs cartel. Europol described the scale of the group's operations as massive and said it was behind about a third of the continent's cocaine trade. Nearly 50 people have been arrested.
Brazil have qualified for the knockout stages of the Football World Cup with a 1-0 victory over Switzerland. There were two entertaining games earlier. South Korea lost 3-2 to Ghana, while Serbia and Cameroon drew 3-3.
시청해 주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 시간에 뵙겠습니다.